Welcome to the Ancient Mobile Games Podcast.
Arg.
Arg, as we are. Now, it is a pirate podcast. No, this is going to be about board games, as usual. I'm sorry for those listeners who wanted us to talk about something else, but I am Dougal from Ancient Mobile Games.
And I am Gelb, and ye be in the wrong place.
This is not going to be our nautical-themed episode. We are planning that for the future. It will happen.
Yes.
It will happen for sure. Yeah. There are so many nautical-themed games out there.
We got to have some sound effects for that.
Oh, of course. Yeah, that's obviously, I may drown you before we get there. So we might not have to make these sound effects. Nautical theme games. I mean, it's just actually talk about theming. Games are themed in specific ways to sell to different people or to be engaged in by different people. Nautical is quite a big theming, as is nature.
Nature
which is pretty huge.
Apparently that's very big right now, yeah.
Massive. And I noticed a few others that have popped up in the last few years, particularly. Like, the older games have this kind of general empire building theme to them, I find. A lot of them. The kind of classic Risk, even Monopoly could be taken as that. You're building a certain thing yourself. I think it comes from collecting things and moving stuff around a map and things like that. Makes sense to be attached to that. There's a lot of the old empire builders, even things like Seven Wonders. And now things have moved into, I think, with the openness of and friendliness of game design, trying to get more people involved and be more accessible, a lot more themes have come up. Cat-based games have become massive.
Yeah.
I think every 10th game maybe that comes out now has at least a cat-based character, if not an entire game themed around a cat. We talked about cat poker in one of the other podcasts, and we also have Calico, is quite a big game where you're making embroidering quilts for very fussy cats, essentially. Is there any other themes that you have noticed of being like, where did this come from? Why is this now the thing that is all over board games?
I don't. I've definitely noticed the nature theme, and I've noticed when people say, maybe people more informed than me, tessellating shapes are going to be big that next year, or something like that. But the way that sci-fi games look at the moment, or like some of them that they're looking, they're quite different. But that's been really interesting to see. Like SETI, which seems very, very hip, or arcs, or the style is different. But in general, as a general point, the kind of fantasy-esque style or the coloring seems to be a lot more colorful now than it used to be. If you look at older games, even ones that aren't necessarily fantasy, but like they're that kind of a dynamic or an aesthetic. Quacks of Quedlingberg, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of grays, a lot of beiges.
Beige is huge in the kind of early 2000s,
exactly.
Mid 2010s side of gaming.
Whereas now, you showed me Canar, or games like that are still. Vikings is not fantasy, but like there's fantastical elements to it that you could imagine may have been quite beige and brown before, whereas now they're these beautiful blues and turquoises and ironwood, is another one. An ironwood, it sounds ironwood sounds like it could totally be a Dungeons and Dragons type vibe, and it is like that. There is that kind of vibe, but it's very much not the kind of traditional Lord of the Rings, Dungeons and Dragons greens, browns, and beiges. So like that I've definitely noticed, which has been really cool. Also the simpler games, a lot of very drastic color changes. You showed us the black and white game, or the quite a few of those smaller games. I've gone a blank of the publisher. There's the cards are bright blue and red, or
yes. So
that kind of vibe I've definitely seen.
Yeah.
But
so I've been wondering whether it's like a printing thing that has upped in the past few years because of board games becoming more and more popular, and more of them being printed in general, that it's been able to have these like bright colors being added into it, I think one of the first ones that really hit me was there's a 2-player game called Canopy, where it looked like someone had taken the saturation and just like maxed it
out,
to its full thing. But it really popped on the shelf. Like as a game, it's a kind of card-based thing where you're playing a rainforest and placing different animals in different parts of the thing. But it popped so much on the thing. And then I go back and look at older games, things like Citadels or Dominion or things that are now seen as kind of classic things, but that kind of beige, almost grayscale side of board games were such a big thing for a while. And I was very interested in why that was the case at the time, more than why it is beautiful now. You know, I don't know why it wasn't made to pop and be brighter back then. What was the kind of design decision back then to kind of go, no, board games should be a bit more muted. Like it feels like it's just more dynamic to play with more of these newer games that are coming out, like Nar, as you were saying, that are really, really bright and contrasted with the art style that they're going for.
It would be interesting to see from an artist's perspective if they have any thoughts, but from a stylistic perspective, you know, you had cartoons usually were kid cartoons, but if they were adult cartoons, they had to be darker and they had to. I wonder if there's an element of that, you know, into it. And original Dungeons and Dragons, you know, artwork has informed a lot. Magic, Magic's also branched out as well, but like the old Magic cards, very dark, very kind of, and the settings of these games were, you know, similar to that. And Risk and games like that, you had your maps, but the map had to be beige in order to make it readable. So I wonder if there was if there are elements that they were simpler and more muted colors so that they could appeal to, I don't know, appeal to men and appeal to you're not feeling bad playing a game as a grown up or something.
Yeah,
like
because
that.
there is still that thing that we get. I mean, even to this day, people coming into the shop and that idea of games are for kids, you know, exactly, as you were saying, with cartoons are for kids. And now that there's a more adult thing, I guess maybe they were trying to branch away from that and being like, this is an adult thing that adults can play. It's also just very strange kind of older style mentality of adults don't like bright colors, which I find hugely denied within my regular experience nowadays.
But now the adults that were kids back then, or the adults who were kids back then, have brought that nostalgia forward as well. You know, I mean, I don't think when Pokemon cards came out, those are quite colorful. Those are quite, you know, quite colorful, you know, comparatively. But everyone who was a big fan of Pokemon at the beginning now has the disposable income to buy a crap ton of Pokemon cards. So, you know, I think there's partially that, but maybe also just aesthetic is changing, and it's coming back, like, you know, the 1980s and into the 90s in other areas. You're starting to see everyone loves people are dressing like they dressed in the 1990s, mall core kind of culture, American mall core culture, like this nostalgia for.
Speaking of which, loving the neon tracksuit that you're wearing today.
Well, thank you. I was waiting for you to comment on it.
Truly a delight.
I've worked hard to make myself look good for you, so I'm always validated when you take notice.
It's our regular fashion segment that we'll be doing every week of what is Gelb wearing.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, informed by Back to the Future. You know, you wear your pants inside out, trousers. Forgive me. Wear your trousers inside out.
You can wear your pants inside out as well under the trousers. You're more than welcome to. No one's going to stop.
But isn't the rule like if you wear two pairs of underwear, then you negate yourself?
Oh yeah. So
basically, if
they're both inside out, then it's fine. It negates it.
Yeah, of course. See, as we say, like aesthetics are important. You know,
yes.
You know,
in game design and game designers.
Exactly. Harking back to the 1800s when, you know, flower theory really, you know, played a big part. Now it's you know, color theories evolved. But I do think that there's this enhancing the color in other areas of culture from a nostalgic element almost brings. It means that you're able to bring it back, but with a nice, clean glow up, like Tron. You look at Tron in the 80s versus the new films. You look at, in cars, the Hyundai has some electric car that looks like it's out of the 80s with this pixelated lights, but it's very bright and so it's not very 80s in that way. And I think I'm seeing that a lot in all areas, but not just board games, but you can see the obnoxious use of fluorescent colors in the 90s being used in a much more grown-up feeling way, and I feel like that's a nice shortcut for someone to say this looks really great and it makes you feel like you're back in the 90s and loving that time.
Do you think that is, as much as anything, a kind of marketing based thing to be like, we're going to attach this nostalgia thing? Or do you think it's actually a visual choice of, oh no, I love this styling, and let's use this in a modern term of things more than it is the, if we attach the 90s to this, the 90s are big right now, in the Stranger Things form of making the 80s big again side of things?
I don't know. I feel like it could be. I feel like one could inform the other. I came across an old Blockbuster card that I had, like a Blockbuster membership card, and at least in the States, the Blockbuster cards were laminated pieces of card, and they're very kind of iconic. At the time, though, they were quite ordinary, and everyone had a Blockbuster card. And so I think there's a combination of, coming across that. There is a sense of nostalgia, but there's also a sense of nostalgia and the time that it represented in terms of like giving the elegance of the logos of that era a little bit more of a second look. And so I don't know if that always happens, from a nostalgic perspective, but I remember in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, all of the logos started becoming skeuomorphic. Like all of the TV logos becoming skeuomorphic, and it was done in a very modern way. But at the time, like these are heavy. They're quite intense. And then in the later 2000s into the 2010s, everyone started going really flat. And, someone like me, I really liked that. I thought, oh, this is nice and elegant and all this kind of stuff. Now there seems to be a reaction against that. But so, is it the fact that you're going for nostalgia because people like it, so therefore that you're saying it's a marketing thing, versus trends are trends, and bell bottoms come back in every 15 years, bell bottoms come back, they're just called something else. I don't know. I'm not sure.
So do you think that game design wise, it's going to move away from this? Because for me, as a retail side of things, brighter colored things with a bit more focused graphic design, they pop. People are more likely to pick those things up. And even me personally, if I see a game that looks beautiful, I'm more likely to pick that up and have a look into it and see what it's like. Do you think that is going to go back to a sort of almost nostalgic feel of beigey grey stylings for board games in 5 or 10 years' time? Or is it something that, no, this works for board games in general, brighter, more contrast, or at least more stylized and artistically chosen stuff?
Well, I don't know. I feel like now I'm definitely putting on the wanky glasses here, but like the democratization of the board game kind of industry, like a lot of other industries, means that niches that had to make do with certain solutions can get more focused solutions for what it is that they want. And so, you walk into Ancient Robot right now, you'll find the beige games coming out. Right. And if that's your aesthetic, if that's something that you like, people are making them. I look at some of these new games that are coming out, and internally I'm like, I don't think that looks pretty at all. But these are great games, and they're doing very well. They're selling very well. So I do wonder if the fact that game creation has been made a lot easier. It's easier than ever to get a game produced. It's cheaper than ever to get one produced. The idea of working with artists from anywhere around the world means that you can find the style that you're looking for, or you can collaborate with someone to come up with some very interesting new style. Whereas if you were thinking about this in the 90s, how hard that would have been, how expensive it would have been, and how hard it would have even been to find people that are like that. We're working on a couple games. Two of the artists we reached out to on social media like that. That's how we found these amazing artists. Yeah. So I wonder if it there might be a trend. Like, you were talking about colorful games. Harmonies was one that I was thinking too, like pumping up the saturation. But I imagine that the trend might be that instead of nature games, colonialism may come back in style. I don't know, who knows? Not, yeah. but those games might come back in style, or they might come back with a slightly different tint. But it doesn't necessarily mean that other game styles will die as much as they would have back in the day. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I wonder if they will look a little dated. In the future, that's the interesting thing. So for me,
they feel dated to someone like me, but that's because I don't identify with them very much.
For sure. So there's a wonderful game design studio called Themeborn, who make some games called Escape Dark Castle, Escape the Dark Sector. They've recently done a Last of Us game, which is fantastic, but they stick with a black and white sort of art style that is almost like a 90s adventure game book thing. It's this very dark, kind of gothically oppressive, but very characterful for horrible ghouls and weird things in Escape Dark Castle, and very strange sci-fi stuff in Escape Dark Sector, and it works absolutely perfectly for the clickers in The Last of Us game. That, I think, will stand the test of time a little bit better than some of these brightly colored games, unfortunately, simply because its style is so unique. And I think we often talk about unique game design, but I think unique in art style is a much harder thing to grab onto within the industry at the moment because there are so many games coming out. But it's, as you're saying, finding that artist that you love, or that kind of side of the game thing is so much easier now to find those unique artists, and not having regular digital art that looks like every other game. Much easier to do now from all across the world, but also because there's so many more people doing these things, or so much more availability to find it than there ever has been, it's also kind of harder to find that unique thing, because something you find unique is no longer unique because suddenly everyone is finding that thing.
But I think actually that's a really good point. I think what's on trend right now is something that looks different. And it's a magic box that you're picking up, and you are going to be immersed into this world. And if this world is a black and white world, great. And if this world is a super high fidelity, colorful world, that's great. And as long as it feels like it's cohesive, then that makes sense. It's much easier to be cohesive if everything is beige and or everything is black and white, right? And just like the blue jeans, blue jeans and white t-shirts, right? If you're a time traveler and you're going between now and probably like the 1850s, if you wear blue jeans, you'll probably be okay. It's like what kinds of elements are always, they're never necessarily in fashion, but they're never out of fashion, or there might be slight variabilities or not. Whereas other trends that are a little bit more unique, a little bit more complex in terms of what it is that they're doing, which is great. You capture the attention, in the moment, but you run the risk of maybe it feeling dated a little bit later.
For sure. I find it really, there's one of our friends who is developing games as well, who is working on a game that is based in kind of American mall culture in the kind of 80s and 90s.
It looks so cool.
Called Last Week of Summer. And it's truly awesome. Really, really great game. Lots of kind of mini game side of stuff that's going on. But it is incredibly brightly neonly colored, and it hits that vibe of nostalgia that both of us, I think, relate to. And it hits that kind of point in time pretty perfectly. I think because it is based in that time period, it is also going to be a game that will still look relevant because it is focused on that time period as a thing. It's not trying to be every time period or everything within a certain, I guess, art style. I think it will last the test of time with what it's doing. I talked with, strangely enough, the designers for trading card game, Star Wars Unlimited, about art and design and why they chose the art style that they did. And because Star Wars grabs from so many different types of things, from the movies to the Clone Wars cartoon to all of these things, they've chosen an art style that is very acceptable for all of these things to be put in, so that the different sort of dimensions of people's heads and bodies and things like that, even though they're very different in the cartoon than they are in the thing, all of them should match up when they're bringing out more of these cards. But because of that, the art style looks not bland, but at
neutral.
least generic, very neutral.
Yeah, very
exactly.
neutral,
And I was really interested at first because when it first came out, I went, well, why didn't you make something that popped more? And because they were pulling from all these places, they wanted something that would last the test of time. And I think it will because of that, and they can pull from all these different places without it feeling alien.
There's a Star Trek game that is, I think, just hit on to the hotness. I've run a blank on its name, but
is it Captain's Chair?
Yes, I think it is. I think so. I was looking at pictures of that, and I felt quite differently to how you just described. Maybe you're feeling with the Star Wars game and this, I think. Like, I don't think it looks great. I as a Star Trek fan, I'm devastated. But when you look at it, they're okay. The cards are okay, but they're all pulling from stills from all of the different shows. If you are a Star Trek fan and you remember the shows, fine. But it's not. It doesn't at least look to me cohesive. You can pull a Picard card. I don't know if there's a Picard card, but like a card with a character that is literally a screen grab from the Next Generation, and then you can play a card with a screen grab from Lower Decks. And Lower Decks is the cartoon, and Next Generation was in the 80s and 90s. And I just find that a bit jarring. And looking at that, I thought, okay, either you're making a decision to go for the nostalgia so that people will just be reminded about these great moments and characters and actors and all that kind of stuff, or you're really lazy. And it feels to me like, at least looking at that, I haven't played it. I'm sure that people will definitely disagree, but it feels a bit lazy. Like it feels like you're doing something, you're creating a game. You should be using that game as an opportunity to bring everybody in. If it was just a TNG game, if it was just a Next Generation game, great. Okay, fine. Yeah, use the stills. Then that's great. But then you can design, everything would be L-cars. Everything could look like that cohesive thing. Whereas it doesn't seem like that with this one, so I think it will feel very dated very quickly.
Okay. So yeah, because you have those licenses. Yeah. I get using that art and not having to get an extra artist in to make a whole new art for it.
I mean, heck of a lot cheaper. Yeah.
It is a lot cheaper, but that is, as you're saying, so cohesiveness for things. So this brings me to the game that I would talk to you about today, which I don't know if you played or not. It was really interesting when it came through the shop, I love it as a game. I think it's very, very clever as games go. It's a game called Ethnos. No. Now, Ethnos is kind of a game that was, I can't remember exactly when it first came out, but it's very clean, very clever playing game where you are recruiting different cards into your hand, which are either attached to a place that is on the board. It's kind of got this small area control element to the game, or they're attached to a different sort of fantastical race which you are doing. So you're drawing those cards into your hand, and then you are playing sets of those cards to add your control counters to places on the board, with one of those cards being like a leader card, which is based on that kind of race of fantastical creatures that you will be playing as. So you might be able to play with the ravens on top, which will allow you to place those control discs in a different area instead of the one that you're meant to. It's a very clever game due to playing down the different amounts of things. You have to play more cards down than you already have control tokens on that space, with you getting different amounts of points depending on not only the cards that you have played during that whole age, and you play over 3 ages, but also based on the amount of control discs you have on those different areas. It's a very clean playing game, but it feels like a bigger area control game where you're constantly aware of what other people are playing. What's really interesting with Ethnos is it's just had a second edition come through. And the one problem I had with the older Ethnos was the art style. Okay. So it was sitting on this very generic Greek fantasy thing, where it was kind of mermaids and satyrs and minotaurs and things like that. But it was a very early 2000s digital artist. Everyone was using these mythological creature pictures that looked a little bit like paintings, but not quite enough. And it felt very bland on the board. Now, the new recent edition is actually Eastern themed. So it's more kind of like Japanese and Chinese mythological creatures and cultures on a much brighter board. And this second edition has grabbed me fantastically well because it's a game I think that was overlooked by a lot of people due to its relative blandness within a sphere where its name isn't particularly sort of great. It didn't grab you very well. Its theme was fine. There was a lot of kind of ancient Greek and things coming out at the time. Cyclades still, or Cyclades, or Cyclades, however it's meant to be said. Ancient Greek's still one of the greatest games out there that's also just had a reprinting and a reimagining, but with brighter art styles and a little bit different with stuff going on. So it's an interesting thing for me to see games re-implemented. And for me, this is great to now have a game that I've always loved, but I didn't want to bring to the table very often because it looked so dry and it was harder to get people into, to now have an art style that pops and a theme that's maybe slightly different, but is still engaging and is the same game as one I have previously loved, and now more people can get into it. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about re-implementations or redesigns of games that have come through that you have either really enjoyed or really hated what they have done with this reimagining of the game, be it actual proper second edition of a game or just a reimagining of mechanics or things that has gone well or badly. Are there any that come to mind?
I can tell you what I don't really like.
Cool.
But I also understand why they do it. And that's all the themed versions of popular games, like Monopoly, Klingon Monopoly, or something like that, right? I think I have 4 copies of Star Trek Monopoly because people kept giving them to me as presents.
I mean, you're an obvious Star Trek fan. So I mean, that makes sense, right? And you like board games, and a lot of people can't see past Monopoly.
Yeah. So I think games like that, or, XYZ Catan, I understand why they do it. That's just not very interesting. That doesn't feel very interesting to me.
For sure.
And I feel like it is contributing to, I understand why they do it. I'm not like against them doing it, but we joked in a previous episode about Wormspan, which is again fine. It's fine. It's fun. It's dragons instead of Wingspan. That's fun, but it also looks very similar in some ways in terms of the art style. So it's almost just like a find and replace versus, at least to me, similar kind of art. It looks like paintings, and the dragon is in a similar shape as the bird. Whereas I was kind of hoping that if they were going to redo Wingspan relatively quickly, make it like dark and make it completely different.
I guess it's that thing of like who is your market.
Exactly.
And I think with Wingspan, it was an interesting thing when Wormspan came through, actually, from a retailer's perspective, because I found that yes, a few people who played Wingspan wanted Wormspan because they wanted kind of similar sorts of things, but a lot of people are either bird people or dragon people. So Wingspan people wanted Wingspan, dragon people wanted Wormspan, and I thought it was really interesting. The one good thing I think about Wormspan is that the game mechanics have been changed, actually.
That's good.
So the game actually feels different enough to be like, this is worth having as a different thing. Recently, we have had an announcement that Finspan is coming out, which is the fish version. And I don't know whether there's a crossover between bird people, dragon people, and fish people, but I hope there is. It looks really interesting, but again, it's that similar sort of art style, similar sort of thing. Is it just a reprinting, or is it a reimagining of the rules that makes it different enough that you're like, oh, I see why this is in the same family of games and why they've kept that art style the same, but there's enough going on in it that I want to play that when I want that specific sort of game style.
There's this designer out in California. His name is Martin Gonzalez, and he runs a pretty popular print and play community online. And he loves reimagining games and reskinning games, and he actually reskinned Wingspan, but as a board game library. So all of the bits were, like, instead of different birds, they were different board games.
Okay.
So which sounds pretty wild.
Yeah.
But very fun and using using the mechanics that work well with Wingspan, but adapting them very slightly so that they would work so making the game a celebration of other board games, right?
Yeah.
So something like that, I find that those kind of reskinnings are actually quite cool. The Star Trek Catan, not as interesting as just like, well, why don't you just try playing Catan and then see if there was an expansion in some other realm or whatever, great. Or, but at the same time, you have to make stuff that people want to buy. Right?
Well, that's it. There's this crossover between our kind of passion for board games and things like that, which comes through. But this is still a retail thing. It is something that people have to spend money on to actually get hold of, which means it costs money to make. You are much more likely to reskin something
which makes
with
sense.
something that people love already to make it sell. You know that will sell. From a design perspective, I think both of us are on that thing of, as I say, we like unique, or we like something that is interesting, that is different. If you're doing something that's the same, but it's now themed towards Stranger Things or something like that, it loses a little bit of the joy that you had originally by finding that sort of game.
But I think doing the flip side of taking something that is maybe I'm talking about IPs mostly, but like taking an IP and looking at a type of game and saying, well, let's make a game like that. But for this, I really enjoy that. So, you're making a Star Trek game, make a new type of Star Trek game, or make a Star Trek game. You want to make a living card game because Star Wars is doing amazing things with their living card game. Great. Make a living card game, but just make it so that when you play it, you're like, I know why this is a Star Trek game and not a reskinning of the Star Wars game or Lord of the Rings or Arkham Horror or any of the other ones. I think
we see it a lot when it comes to the Cthulhu mythos, simply because it's out of copyright.
Exactly.
So anyone can use Cthulhu, and therefore you have Cthulhu Gloom and Cthulhu Flux and all these sort of things.
Exactly.
Which does make some sort of sense, particularly from I want something thematic that feels a certain way. But if you're attaching it to everything, that's no longer got the interest it had.
Maybe an exception to what I said was looking at the world of RPGs, and like that's actually quite interesting because you have I don't know, in my head you have systems, playing systems, which to me are kind of like video game systems. It just happens to be that the video game system is designed for Dungeons and Dragons, but you can take out that cartridge and you can put in Star Trek, for example. The Star Trek RPG, I think, is a great example of an RPG system that's different, but it's definitely taking a lot of cues, but it's turning it into its own, and it's diving deep enough that people can have an ongoing relationship with in a nice way. Don't think it would have existed though if D&D wasn't there.
Oh, for sure. So yeah, when we talk about RPGs, very much meaning tabletop RPGs, played pen and paper and sitting
source
in
books
a group, as opposed to computer games or anything else like that. A lot of those I agree with wholeheartedly. Alien, the RPG, is fantastically tense, gives you that feeling of being powerful at first and then suddenly having no power and it all goes horribly wrong. There's a whole bunch of Blade Runner tie-in things that are fantastic. Bunch of a company called Free League makes fantastic tie-in ones that are really good, Modifius and things like that. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Whenever a new RPG comes out, tabletop RPG again comes out, which is attached to something I already know, I'm always interested in finding out, why has this been chosen? What is the system that is being built around for this? Is it just, it's Dungeons and Dragons with this thing slapped on top? Or is it, they've made this? And I think with tabletop RPGs, it's much easier to make mechanics that feel thematic towards what you are doing with that IP, rather than on mechanical based board game, which a lot of the time is cards or tokens or dice that are moved around the place.
I wonder if that's then somewhat of the difference. Like, if you are used to playing 5e, Dungeons and Dragons 5e, which is 5e is the 5th edition is the system that you're playing, the set of rules. Someone might come out with a new TTRPG, tabletop RPG, but then they'll say they'll write it for 5e. They'll write it for the 5e rules, right? Yeah. So you can see that happens a lot. And that's a great way for, if you have a great story, you have a system that then you can write for. You can adapt the things that need to be adapted usually it's just like words, semantic changes. Yeah. A barbarian or a mage isn't a mage, it's something else. Like whatever. If you need to change things, spells might be spells or something else. But people who like the idea of your story, it might make it easier for them to be like, okay, it's a 5e game. I know the 5e rules. Yeah. Let me just get it off. Whereas for people like me, like, Monopoly, it's Star Trek Monopoly. I don't have the same kind of reaction for it because, it's going to be a Monopoly, but all the things are going to be, it's,
exploring a different world and a different mechanics sort of thing. So you are simply,
So I feel like RPGs are a bit different in terms of how it works. If someone's, I know a lot of people like to develop their own systems, but weirdly, when I've talked to people who play a lot of TTRPGs, that can be great, but that can also be a barrier. Weirdly, whereas for board gamers, you want something different, you want something new, and so that's curious as well.
Yeah, for sure. How's your feeling on? So there's a few games that have come out. There's one that has been huge for me personally, playing with other people, because it is very straightforward to get into, but also feels like it's got enough depth and enough kind of player interaction. It's a game called Trio, which is a very beautiful card game. It's got kind of sugar skull, Mexican theme with everything very color-based. But it's actually a re-implementation of a Japanese game called Nana, which simply means 7 in Japan. And it's the same game, but the art style being this kind of Mexican sugar skull thing with very bright colors compared to the original Japanese, which is beautifully illustrated, tiny cats, and is a much lighter color palette and everything else like that. Feels like we, even though it's great and very visual, and I do enjoy the art style of Trio, when I see where it came from, which was a uniquely illustrated thing, makes me feel a little bit sad that we didn't get that over here in the West for that version of the game. What's your feelings on?
I like that though. Yeah, I think that's cool, because that has taken something that clearly was beautiful and successful and tweaked it in a way that has made it successful. So people have gotten access to the game, but it's nice to then be able to dive in and realize that, and then seek out the original game. Like I love the fact that, at least personally, I think it adds to the lore of the game, or at least in my head. It's similar to, there are a lot of games that are really, really good that are re-implementations or reimaginings of 52 card deck games. Like Skull King is one of my favorites.
Yes.
Skull King is Up and Down the River with a couple of special cards. There's a game called Up and Down the River that you can play with 52 card deck. That's great fun. Really, really great fun. But it is pretty much the same as Skull King, only it's pirate themed. There are a couple of interesting cards and trick taking game. And but I love playing it. I also really love the fact that it is, someone has looked at this classic game that maybe not super popular, but it's a classic game, and they've made very intentional changes to make it more fun. And so I quite like that element of it.
It's very interesting because it comes from another game called Rage, which is a German game. Okay. So it's a game that has been around for ages, but as these different theming things have done, has added new audience, which I think is great to have more people playing the game. But it's also, I find it interesting when something new comes out and it loses something. So this is another interesting thing I find.
What's an example of that?
An example that I think would be Sheriff of Nottingham. Okay. So Sheriff of Nottingham is great. The second edition, also fantastic. Really good as a game. The art style has changed to slightly more cartoony, and I think it's lost a little bit of the character that the original game had. It's not lost any of the gameplay. It still plays the same, and if you ignore all of the art and everything else like that, you still have exactly the same time, with only a couple of little tweaks just to kind of make things a bit easier. Usually in the rule book, the way it's written, that's usually where kind of big implementations take place. But you've got something that is no longer quite has the same atmosphere, the same feel that maybe the original one did have, becoming a bit more maybe generic is the idea. And as I say, still a great game. Really love playing it. Have the second edition myself. But when I look and I see online the first edition still exists, it's like, this is kind of interesting. And then you have the opposite with things like Eclipse, Second Dawn of the Galaxy, big game where the second edition has come through, and all they've done is make everything a bit easier and a bit more accessible to get out of the box. Not really changing much of the art style, but making everything sort of feel a bit more together in the same world, as well as adding in some of the expansions from the first edition into the base version of the second edition of this game, which I think is really, really great. It's just an interesting thing for me to see what other designers feel about re-implementations. How would you feel if one of your games you then was taken on by a publisher and they went, okay, well, we don't like this theme, or we just want to change all of the art that you've worked really hard on, or all of these mechanics ever so slightly, and we're going to reskin it as a spaceship themed game, when you were like, that was my pirate game that I loved for like 5 or 6 years. Is there a different feeling attached to that, going, oh wait, I can see how this attaches to a new market? Or is it more of a like, why didn't you like those decisions I made?
I think it would have to depend on how they did it, but like fundamentally, the thing that I made still exists, right? And it was out there. And if a publisher went in and changed everything and turned my pirate game into a space game or whatever, and it got more people playing it, great. If the way that they do that is to make it super cartoony when it was like this very, erudite type thing, but more people play it, great. You know, and I feel like even if that's the case, that, you know, people might then say, "Oh, I love the game, but I hate this version of it," and someone who's never heard of it says, "Oh, there's another version of it. Let's go in." And I just feel like you're adding to the lore of the game, and there's so much. Maybe for probably a subject for another day, but there's so many games out there that are coming out, and you worry about saturation. You worry about, you know, and the fact that so many games are coming out and yet other games are being reprinted it's kind of cool. And so, yeah, for me, I mean, I'm sure that you talk to other designers and they'll have very different reactions to it. But for me, it's like, if more people can play and more people can have fun, and if you come in and you take on my game and you find some flaw and you want to change it, or you want to change it, an aspect of it, as long as it is done in a way that has a purpose to it.
Sure.
You know, I think sometimes you see, I'm trying to think of the name, it's the camel game, Camel Up.
Yeah.
Right. If you look at Camel Up, like if you look at the old boxes of that, at least, there was a specific style, whereas the newer ones look a lot more child friendly.
Yes.
Right. And a lot of people will mention it as a game that they'll just pull out and play.
Yeah.
Does the fact that they've made it more cartoony make you think that you can play it a little bit, like you can grab it quickly, maybe make it more accessible? So like, I don't really particularly like that style.
Sure.
But if that was the reason why they did it that way, great. Like, if that was the intended result and that was the reason why, you know, a lot of people are going for it, or at least talking about it a little bit more, as a game designer, I would think that would be fabulous. But I know that not everyone shares that at all.
Yeah, it's interesting for us. This is our general episodic mention of Reiner Knizia. Every single one of his games, essentially, that has been a really interesting mechanically one, is now getting reimagined or reprinted. Ra has come through, which is actually fantastic, one of his best auction games ever, which has been redone in a fantastic way. We were talking about High Society before.
That was a reprint.
Was a reprint, and the original box was 4 times the size and looked so grey and so bland. And the newer version being a tiny box and with this like beautiful Art Nouveau style 1920s Gilded Age French thing, looks beautiful, and it makes it much more likely that I'm going to bring it to the table. So I think there is, with these things in particular, there's a whole bunch of his games that have been changed completely thematically that are now coming out in 2025 that haven't been around for 20 years. So I think it's great to be able to bring something back like that. I have a problem as well with the things that are reiterated on year after year. They brought out a second edition the year after the first one came out. And it's like, well, why? Is it because there was some problem mechanically which you needed to fix, which I am totally down with, and that's very, very important? Or is it, well, we need to break your box to sell more? You know, it feels like, are you just selling the same stuff to the same people and trying to grab money off people who love it? Or is this a way to share it with more people?
Well, what are your thoughts about games that are like the publisher will create like a family and they will make all the games feel similar to each other, even if they are quite different games? Like, for example, you know, the folks who make Corridor and is it Abalone? Abalone. Yeah. Those kind of games, they all are clearly styled. Like, the boxes all look the same. They're the same dimensions. They're all very different games. And I could imagine that, but they're all branded like basically the same. And I know that they've gone through now a change and they're reintroducing them all. Yeah. But how do you feel about that? Like, like, do you like the fact that, is it helpful to know that, like, okay, every game that looks like that, I know it's going to play in about 20 minutes. And there's another publisher who does, they do games, but they all use the same piece. Like they have a triangle, like or a pyramid that's hollow in the middle, and you can stack them to make like trees or make things.
I've gone blank on the name. They made a game called Jinx, if I remember
exactly. And so they come out with new games, but they're using the same elements, you know.
I find it really interesting when it comes to Corridor and Quarto and things like that. They I think it is one of those things that's really helpful from a consumer perspective of knowing what you're getting into, because it's so hard when it comes to games, because it's about what you're playing. It's about what you're doing and practically actual actions involved in it. You can't know that before buying it. Even you watch a little video on it, a 10-15 minute video, you can't know how it feels to play until playing it. If you have a game design studio that makes these things that all the boxes look the same or at least similar, as a consumer, you know what you're getting into. That can be really useful, but it has to be a very specific design which is focused towards that thing. I think they actually do a really good job with Corridor and Quarto. I'm not the biggest proponent of their games because I think if I want an abstract game, I want a really crunchy, strange abstract game. But they have people who love it and they'll play one. I think it can be a little bit of a trick in a way, because as you mentioned, these games play very differently. And someone can buy Corridor and go, oh, I love Corridor, that's great. See Quarto on the shelf and go, oh, I'm going to get Quarto because I know that this, and it's a very different feeling game. Sure. So it can be a bit of a trick, but I think it's a good way to keep all of what you are doing as a company separate from what everyone else is doing. Sure. We often talk about uniqueness and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of game designers that we know that aren't general lexicon for things. Board games are still niche enough that people aren't aware of, oh, this is a Martin Wallace game. Oh, I love that thing. You know, they might know mechanics a bit more, maybe area control or push your luck games or trick taking games. They might know these things, but not everyone does. And when it comes to game designers, it's an even smaller field for it. But when it comes to publishers, if they're all in the same box, they can go, I know the look of that thing. That looks like something I already like. That's an easier purchase for someone to do. But if the game isn't very similar to what they're doing, it can be a little bit of a trick. Yeah. I think it's a hard thing to do from a publisher perspective. There's a wonderful French company called Ludonaut who are absolutely brilliant. They make abstract games. All of their boxes are different colors, but all of the same graphic design. And they get different designers making all of their things. But because they're all smaller scale abstract games, all of those, symbology and everything else like that makes sense within what they're doing. We were talking about NAR the other day, Knarr.
I said Knarr.
Really hard to actually say it, which is a Viking themed thing, but they use, Bombix has a design language which is colorblind friendly as well as partially sighted friendly, which they will be using in almost all of their games going forward, which has little symbol and color that is different for every color of card in there, which means that if you are partially sighted or colorblind, you can understand what color that is meant to be. And I think that sort of design language, to spread that across lots of games, is really, really useful, even if all of your games look different on the box. I like, and I've always liked, unique games. So for me, if you're a publisher, every game you bring out looks completely different. I am so down with that. But I also understand it from the side of selling to consumers. You want them to be similar so that people do know. And this Wingspan, Wormspan, Finspan thing, I get it. They have followers who will be jumping on all of these because they love that design philosophy.
And Stonemaier Games also is you look at the other games that they, obviously Jamie Stegmaier kind of launched it off with Scythe. And Scythe as a box, it's similar kind of size as Wingspan. The game I know he's working on now is like a open world sci-fi game. So you might not think that open world sci-fi fits with birds, but the way that that Wingspan wasn't him in terms of the designer, but as a publisher. But there are these kind of, this size is what they kind of specialize in.
Yeah, All Play is very well known for that. They have these tiny square boxes that are almost cubes for every single game they have, which means that they pack a lot of game into that smaller space. It also means that it's easier to see, it's smaller to ship. There's a whole bunch of variables that are very, very useful and very helpful for them. But it also means that they have this design language that goes across all of the games, even if they're done by completely different designers and have completely different art styles. So I think a size of box thing can be really useful. I find that I tend to get into games by publisher based on what they do with that design. So for example, Devere is a company that I love. They've made games like The Red Cathedral, Sand, Rock Hard, 1977 I think is what it is, and Salton Sea and The White Castle. And these are beautiful games, all very different art style, but they pack their games, their boxes even, filled with game. They are some of the heaviest boxes that I have ever held, size compared to weight-wise. But I know that anytime I buy a De Beer-based game, there's a lot more game in there than it looks like there is. And that gives me some sort of joy when I find these games and I go, oh, this is going to be that bigger, crunchier thing, completely differently styled than the rest of the games, completely differently art, but I trust that for that thing. So I think when it comes to publisher design language, that can be really useful to have these things in different stuff. But also, when things are re-implemented, I find that really interesting to see what decisions they have made with that. As I mentioned Ethnos earlier, they've changed it to an Eastern themed thing. Is that because there was a large market already filled with this classical Greek side of things, or was it to change for the sake of change? I'm glad because it looks different and it pops and it looks like it's great, unique, character-filled art. But I don't know where that decision's come from, and the box is the same size. And that's the thing is, at least the high society making a smaller box. There's a decision I can understand in that, you know.
I mean, with all of this stuff, whether it's aesthetics or design language or even gameplay, you are always having to balance the familiarity that someone might have with the novel. And I feel like good games balance that really well, and it makes you feel like you've never seen anything like this, but you know exactly what it is. This kind of hidden Proto-Indo-European that we seem to, all inherently understand. But that means that sometimes when you have something that is actually quite different, even if it's simple, it's quite jarring, and you don't know why. And I imagine that that's the kind of the basis when it's talking about, like, whether it's reprintings or design language or nostalgia, looking at nostalgia, like there are ways to do nostalgia that are quite comfortable and accessible, and there are ways to do it that are quite jarring and they feel very alien. And sometimes you're going for that, but like I do find it's interesting in terms of these decisions. Is like, where on that continuum do you want everything to be more familiar, like the Corridor, the unnamed Corridor publisher that I can't remember right now, or do you want it like more abstract in that I don't. This is going to be a completely different game to the other one, but I know that there's going to be a lot more game in this box than I'm thinking. So they're already setting those expectations for me, and it can be as wild as crazy and crazy as you know, as we want. But speaking of games, of kind of different games and different reprintings, are there specific ones that are relatively new to the shop that you're particular, or maybe ones that are on their way that you're particularly either excited about or looking forward to?
So Ethnos I'm really interested in. As I say, it's come through the shop Eastern and it's theme, fantastic. Eastern theme. Interesting to mention Corridor. We recently had the Pac-Man Corridor come through, which is the same game, but it's now with black tiles, little Pac-Man things.
Actually makes sense.
It makes sense, right? Because that's what that game kind of felt like anyway. So that kind of makes some sort of sense. I'm kind of down with that.
I like when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, that works. Outside of that, I am actually quite interested in Finspan, mainly because I liked what Wormspan did that changed Wingspan. I quite liked Wingspan, but I much prefer playing Wormspan. I think as a board game, there's a bit more interaction with other people and randomness of how the game is set up, which I find really interesting. So I'm crazy interested to see what Finspan comes through. I love implementations of games that are two-player versions of another game. Azul Duel, which is one of the harder games to say. Azul Duel is a two-player only version of Azul, which worked really well two-player anyway. So I'm really intrigued how that works. That should be out in a few month or so. As well as recently we've had the Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth, which is based off Seven Wonders Duel, which was already a two-player re-implementation of a game called Seven Wonders. Also the cleanest, most engaging. Again, they've made the contrast pop. They've themed it around something that makes sense with what you're doing with the different victory conditions you have for it. So those are the ones that I'm most excited about at the moment. But there's always new stuff coming out, and I'm always trying to be on top of it as much as possible. So I'm sure I'll mention more things in the future. Yeah, it's just a really exciting time to be part of board games as a whole with all of these different things. I don't think we came to any sort of conclusion there about whether re-implementations are good or not, but it was very fun to talk about with you. Yeah, that's Ancient Robot Games podcast. Thank you all for spending your time with us today. I have been Dougal, who is part of Ancient Robot Games.
I have been Gelb.
And this is edited by Ryan Scott. Thank you as always, and we'll hopefully see you next time.